Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Zitzow. I'm the programs chair for ULI Oklahoma. Thank you for joining today. I think we have a pretty fun and exciting topic with Lisa and Katie. If you have questions throughout the chat, you can send them into the chat box and we'll do our best to moderate those, but there will be time at the end for some additional Q&A. Thank you. As I mentioned, I'm the programs chair for ULI Oklahoma. Right now, everything is virtual. We are trying diligently to provide the best content that we can right now. So if you have any ideas or you'd like to be part of an event, please reach out to me. Let me know. I'll put my information in the chat box. We're looking for fun and interesting topics to do right now. And I'll go over some future events at the end of this that we have coming up. But our mission statement's on the screen, as our sponsors right now. We really want to thank our sponsors. Without them during the pandemic, we would not be able to operate. And so I want to give a shout out to all of them. They've been very supportive during this time and understanding that a big part of ULI is networking, which has become increasingly difficult to do during the time of webinars and virtual events. So thank you to our sponsors. Upcoming events, we have a really interesting one coming up next week. It has to do with tenants and their relationships with landlords. We've got some local brokers and attorneys that are going to be able to answer legal questions and kind of give a bit of a market update on what they're seeing in office, retail, industrial. Should be pretty great. Then we have just a fun casual social event, September 3rd. We're doing downtown trivia. I'll be hosting that, but if you have a team that you want to get together with and sign up, that'd be great. Your registration includes a local 6-pack of beer that you'll be able to pick up from the ULI office, so money well spent. And then the Copenhagenized Book Club is a 3-part series. We're gonna look at Michael Corville Anderson's book and kind of compare it to maybe what Oklahoma City's doing and different types of infrastructure to increase cycling and its modal share in your city. And then October 13th, we have our virtual meeting, which is the ULI Nationals fall meeting that you can sign up for. Michelle, I think that one's full members only.
It's actually open to everybody. So, okay. Yep, spring meeting is full members only, but fall is for everyone.
Perfect. So sign up for the fall meeting. And then the next slide. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. Lisa Chronister is the Assistant Planning Director for Oklahoma City, and Katie is the Principal Planner. Getting to my screen, Lisa has been with the planning department since 2014. In this role, she leverages her architectural experience and influence public decision-making, improve public and private development to ensure a vibrant, attractive environment for the entire community. Before joining the planning department, she has over 2 decades of experience in traditional architectural practice. She's established herself as an accomplished manager of complex and large-scale projects, both new and renovations. Working in Oklahoma and New York, she led the design and production of a full range of K-12 higher education facilities, as well as numerous office, cultural, laboratory, athletic, and hospitality projects. Lisa earned her Master's of Architecture from Pratt Institute and has a bachelor's from the University of Oklahoma. And then for Katie, in 2020, in March, Katie has been serving as the principal planner of the current Planning and Urban Design Division for the City of Oklahoma City, where she oversees the current planning functions, design review districts, and the city's historic preservation program. Prior to assuming this role, Katie has served as the city's preservation officer. A native Oklahoman, Katie holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Oklahoma and a master's degree in historic preservation from Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. Katie completed her AICP certification in 2016, and prior to her time with the city, Katie was the executive director Preservation Oklahoma, a statewide nonprofit. So I will turn it over to Lisa and Katie to get started, but I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to help our ULI membership in navigating your urban design process.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm going to share my screen and we'll go from there. Okay, so everyone can see my design review slide. Yes?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. So the only other thing I'll say about Katie and I is before I became assistant director, I was the division manager of the current planning and urban design division. I did that for right at 5 years, and it remains near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to share this presentation with Katie. Before we get into our presentation, I want to do a quick audience poll just to see who's joining us. I'm going to launch the poll. You should see it on your screen. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to respond. This will help Katie and I frame our presentation. Our question is, we want to know who has had experience with the design review process in Oklahoma City. If you haven't voted, please vote. Okay, it looks like the polling shows about half of people have had experience with design review and half have not. So we will keep our, we've kept a lot of our presentation pretty basic because we want to capture people who really don't know the first thing about what we're talking about. And as Mark described earlier, we want to hear from people during the presentation so we can make clarifications as we go on. So we're going to discuss, well, what is design review? That's usually people's first question. Then we're going to talk about why it's important to you, to the city, to the people who use the environment. We're going to talk about how do you know if it applies to your project. A lot of projects start and almost finish before they realize they're in a design review district. And we'll talk about how the process works. And then we'll talk about some other changes and initiatives here at the city that everyone needs to be aware of. Katie.
So design review is a tool that the City of Oklahoma City uses to review projects, changes to existing buildings, demolitions, and construction of new buildings throughout identified, key areas of Oklahoma City, both downtown, numerous commercial districts throughout the city, as well as historic preservation areas. And it is within the Chapter 59 of the Municipal Code that all of this process is laid out, and it's part of the process to get any sort of building permits or other permits for work in those designated areas of Oklahoma City. You have to go through the design review process before you get to the building permit process, and we'll go through that kind of step by step later. Oklahoma City has numerous design and historic preservation districts, and you see them listed here on the screen. These are and each of those different districts is overseen by the commission or committee that you see listed in bold. And then this next slide shows those again mapped all over the city. You can see they're largely concentrated around the downtown area with Scenic River spanning the largest area across, of course, the Oklahoma River. You see that there are some areas shown on this map I just wanted to call out that are urban conservation districts, the light shade green hatched areas like Linwood and Gatewood and some other areas like that. Those do not go through a design review process. I always like to point that out to people because that can be confusing. You'll also see here, in addition to the 9 historic districts, that we also have 9 individually designated historic landmarks, and those are sprinkled through throughout the city, some within other existing design districts and some out in areas that otherwise don't have any design review. But each of these areas is an identified zoning district that has its own set of guidelines and regulations and has its own committee or commission appointed by the mayor and city council to oversee those districts. And they're all staffed by staff within current planning and urban design in the planning department. Why is design review important? We talked when we were setting this up that a lot of times we kind of skip right over this idea and get to the nuts and bolts of how do you apply and what's required and what do you submit to get your CA. But we feel like it's really important for people to understand the purpose of design review. We've got some bullets here and I won't read every word of each one of them, but design review is really about creating places in Oklahoma City that people want to be. And places that make Oklahoma City a unique, distinctive, attractive, desirable place for people to live, for people to work, for people to visit. It also ensures that where we have areas that have a really established character or that have a historic significance, that we're protecting those and revitalizing them and enhancing them for future generations to continue to enjoy. Next. And we just put some eye candy on these next 2 slides to just give you an idea of the wide array of types of projects that go through design review, everything from historic homes to outdoor spaces, new construction, historic preservation projects, in the downtown area, all sorts of different districts from Paseo to downtown to Plaza District. Every scale, large and small, from teeny tiny house in Heritage Hills East to the convention center, Capitol Hill, Automobile Alley, all these different areas are within different design review districts and have gone through the review process to get approved.
So the design ordinance for all of these areas includes regulation and guidelines for some mostly big picture items of your project. Height and setback. Some districts have minimum heights, some have maximums. Most have maximum setbacks. Materials. High quality materials are required in all the design review districts. That's typically masonry, glass, architectural metals. Wood is allowed where appropriate. Doors and windows. Katie described that a big part of design review is creating places where people want to be and to animate the street life. How do you do that? By having a high percentage of transparent doors and windows at the ground floor. Parking lots, make sure that they're well screened and landscaped. There are lots of regulations and guidelines for sidewalks to make sure that they are wide enough to be walkable, that street trees are located appropriately, that some street furnishings are located out of the way of the pedestrian. Landscaping that's appropriate to our climate and location, and signs that are scaled to the building, work with the architecture, and inform what they need to inform. So how do I know if it applies to my project? If there's one thing anyone takes away out of this meeting, I hope it is this actually, and that's how to check your zoning. This applies to if you're working in a design district or anywhere in the city. And if this will also tell you if your project is or is not in Oklahoma City. So there are a couple ways to do that. I want to describe it, how you do it from the planning department webpage. So if you go to our webpage, this button, teal colored button, design review and historic districts, you click that toward the bottom of the page under resources. There is a all zoning by address. And from there, you can enter your address. If your address does not come up, but you are certain that you were in Oklahoma City, you can try an adjacent address. It might be that the address you entered in hasn't been legally established in the city database. But if you're positive that address is correct and it doesn't show up, you can call the subdivision and zoning department to get you set up with your address. So after you enter your address, and I used Mark Zitzow's business address, just I thought it was convenient. So 1 East Sheridan, and you'll get a graphic of a map. And if you're not familiar with the map, it takes a little bit getting used to, on the map, there's different shadings that show different zoning districts. And this one, so 1 East Sheridan is in Bricktown. It's immediately east of the railroad tracks off of Sheridan, across from the melting pot. There's a BC text that stands for Bricktown Core. That Bricktown Core is a design review district. You'll see on the west side of the tracks, it says DBD, that's Downtown Business District. That's a design district. If you click on any of the little house markers, that'll give you the address and the zoning of those properties. There's some other symbols on here to see. The DP symbol, it's real faint, it's real hard to see. DP is downtown parking. That means that these parcels are exempt from parking. And I don't immediately remember what DSHA stands for. If I go to legend up here, there's a key of what many of these things stand for. So that's, like I said, if you're working on any project, if your client comes to you and says, hey, I want to remodel or add on or build at this site, the very first thing you should do is check the zoning. When people call me to ask questions about their property, the first thing I ask them is for an address, because if I don't know exactly where or what I'm talking about, then I can't even begin to help any sort of site or zoning analysis. Do we have any questions about that? Okay, so here's just another blow up of, and you can click layers on and off and get more detail. Then, so Katie's going to describe, now that we know if we're in a design review district, she's going to describe kind of what happens next and how it really works.
So this starts us off with pictures of the application packet, which is officially the first step. I will say that for just about any type of project, we would strongly encourage you to contact staff before you start putting a lot of time and effort and money into preparing your application packet. Contact staff, make sure you're in the district that you think you're in, make sure you understand which set of guidelines you're supposed to be referencing and are going to be applicable to your project. Talk to staff about the project itself, and they may be able to head you in the right direction if something that you're proposing is not likely to get approved or doesn't meet a certain guideline or regulation, or if you're going to need additional reviews for a zoning variance or some other kind of requirement beyond the design review process. So that preliminary phone call, email to design review staff is strongly encouraged and can be really, really helpful in the process. But once you're ready to apply, you'll look at the application packet. These include instructions for how to apply and how the process works and the timeline, as well as a checklist of what materials you're supposed to submit. I always tell people it comes down to, we want to know what it looks like now and what it's going to look like when you're finished. And depending on the scope of your project, you're going to document that in different ways. Drawings, floor plans, elevations, materials, photos of what's there now. All of those kinds of things are going to go into evaluating a project through the design review process. Okay. So design review and historic preservation applications can go through one of two routes. Many things can be approved through staff review that you see on the top, or administrative review, where staff can review the project, confirm that it meets specified guidelines and regulations, and issue the certificate of approval or certificate of appropriateness. You use that document, that certificate, to then go get any permits that you need and start your construction. For projects that don't meet those thresholds for staff review, those have to go to a monthly meeting of the applicable design review commission or committee. Those meetings, as I said, happen once a month, and applications will either be approved or denied or continued to a future meeting if revisions are necessary. Sometimes those can be revisions that ultimately come back to staff and qualify for administrative approval. Once your project is approved, you get your certificate and then again can go through permits and on to constructing your project.
Yeah, Katie, we had a question about someone has asked,
yeah.
What happens if you complete a project and find out later it was supposed to have design review? If your project, if it needed a building permit, you will find out when you go to the permit counter that you were supposed to have gone to design review. They will catch it when they do their zoning review. If it is an item such as for historic preservation districts, things like replacing your windows does typically not need a building permit. So you wouldn't catch it until one of your neighbors calls in to complain that you are replacing your windows. And then at that point, you would go back through, contact staff, get the application in, and kind of resume the process of getting a certificate of approval, and hopefully nothing that you already bought will have to be changed. Katie, do you have anything else to say about that part of it?
Yeah, just that it happens a lot more than you would think. People do work that they don't realize requires review, or they don't realize it requires a permit. And then end up, calling us or coming to our office. Either they can't get the building permit, like Lisa said, or they get a notice of violation from code enforcement that they've done work without a CA. We review those CAs when people submit them retroactively, just like any other CA. We don't, slap you over the wrist with a ruler or anything. We take them through the exact same review process. I think we work pretty hard to try to find a way to make things comply and try to work with property owners so that they don't have to go back and undo much at all, if anything. But if something is really out of compliance, then you may have to make revisions or, get additional variances, that sort of thing, to bring it into compliance. This slide shows some elements of the timing for design review. Staff review at a minimum is going to take roughly 7 days, assuming you get everything turned in and it's complete. We issue staff approvals on a rotating basis every Monday. So if we get your application, Tuesday of the week before, everything's great, meets the guidelines, we have all the documents we need, that approval is going to go out, or that approval will be issued the following Monday. And then there is a 10 business day appeal period for that administrative approval, where an aggrieved party, a neighbor, could potentially appeal the approval to the Board of Adjustment. Once that appeal period is up, then you would be able to get any permits you need and construct your project. I would say for administrative approvals, it's pretty rare that we have an appeal, because those are usually pretty minor and pretty cut and dry things that clearly meet the guidelines and the regulations. But we do have to observe that 10-day appeal period. The same thing goes for commission and committee reviews, although it's a lengthier process, typically from when you apply to when it gets heard by the committee. Our deadlines for commission and committee meetings are roughly a month ahead of that meeting, and those are all posted on our website. You can find when the meetings are and then when the deadline is to get on that meeting agenda. Staff has a pretty short turnaround to review your application, follow up with you with any questions, prepare a staff report for the commission or the committee, as well as for the public to be able to review the work that's proposed, and then get all of that published and noticed according to all the requirements prior to the committee meeting. If your CA is approved at that commission or committee meeting, then again, there's the 10 business day appeal period before you can get a permit and go on with construction. So that commission review can be a 5-week to 6-week process, assuming all your ducks in a row and you get approved at that first meeting. And then there is the potential for something to be continued to another meeting if something needs to be revised.
Yeah,
Hey, Katie.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We just had a quick question come in. Could you clarify what are some examples of activity or projects that only require staff review? Can you build that out?
Sure. So it varies from district to district. A lot of things that qualify for administrative review are going to be landscaping changes, paving, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots. It might be work that doesn't result in any sort of a visual change to a property. In HP, for instance, if you're replacing something, but it's going to match what was there before, that often will qualify for administrative approval. In HP, things that are minimally visible from the street sometimes can be administratively approved. Other design districts have different thresholds for things that they can approve. Certain square footage limitations on if a project is below so many square feet or a sign is below the required size, then they can be administratively approved. But those things are all laid out in the ordinance for each different design district, and you can find those online, and staff can walk you through for each district what staff can approve. Generally, a really major project, a large new building being constructed, a large building being demolished, something that is really a significant change to the appearance of a building, those kinds of things potentially would need to go to a commission or committee for review.
Yeah, I would add that in downtown, the threshold for staff approval is 20,000 square feet, which is a pretty big building.
Yeah, that's true. When I say big.
Right, yeah, big, 20,000 square feet. But staff can only approve it if it squarely meets all of the regulations and guidelines. Two other points I wanted to make on this slide is we get maybe 3 other points. We get almost every time someone asks, do I have to wait for the 10-day appeal period before I do whatever it is I wanted to do? Let's say it's something that doesn't require a permit, like exterior painting on masonry, something like that. Do I have to wait? Well, the people who get noticed of the work and of the approval, they have a right to appeal the approval. And if you want to take the risk to do this work, and without knowing for sure that someone's not going to appeal, that's your time, that's your money. But we, in the end, will recap tips for success, and one is always to plan ahead. Just don't get yourself in that time squeeze. Another thing that's not communicated on this slide, because it would be just another line and another color, is so you can't get your building permit until you have your CA. Design review staff gets an opportunity to stamp off on the building permit set. That's how staff knows that what got a permit matches what got approved in design review. So staff cannot sign off on the permit until the 10-day appeal period is done. However, you can submit the permit for the building permit sometime during the design review process, because building permits, I'm told, are taking about 3 weeks. So you don't have to wait to submit for the building permit until after the appeal period. You could do that before, and so those approval processes can run somewhat concurrently. Does that make sense?
I'll add, Lisa, I'll add one thing to that as far as the timing of your project that you would think would be clear, but often is not, is that your documents that you submit for your permit have to match the documents that are in your CA. Sometimes people get approved for that CA. A month or two later, they come back in to get a permit and they've moved a bunch of things around. Some setbacks have changed, some windows and doors have changed, and either the CA will have to be revised so that it matches the permit, or you'll need to submit different documents for the permit that match the CA. Staff can't sign off on it if it's different from what was approved by staff or by the commission and committee.
Yes, and another note about the timing, someone had asked, well, how do I know what are some things that could be administratively approvable? I think some people they assume, and they assume correctly on some level, that administrative approval will be quicker, but we often have applications that just kind of linger around and actually move slower than the committee reviews. I think that's because for things that have to go to committee, staff and the applicant are driven by this calendar timeline of the application deadline and the meeting date and the public noticing date, all these things. Everybody is really motivated to keep up with those deadlines. But administrative review, people often feel that there's not this pressing timeline to submit their revisions and to submit all the information, and so they drag out over months. And I just point that out to say, don't be freaked out when we say, hey, it's got to go to committee, because I've often observed that sometimes that it can be quicker than the administrative process.
I see a question about structural versus artistic or visual preference, and that I think might be kind of addressed in the next slide or two.
Here, let me get my cursor going.
I think this one's me still.
Yes.
Or switch it over to you.
It's you.
Okay. So all of the regulations and guidelines for the design districts are either captured in Chapter 59 of the Municipal Code under each of those districts' ordinances, and we have all of them broken out on our the website that Lisa showed earlier for current planning and urban design, so that you have a handout for each individual committee and you don't have to read through all of Muni Code. But there are guidelines and regulations within Chapter 59, and then there are also supplemental guidelines and other documents that have been adopted by reference for the different design review committees. The guidelines and regulations are really a combination of some very specific, very black and white things like setbacks and heights and requirements for fencing, requirements for paving, that are things that you would typically see, reviewing a site plan. And then others that are more discretionary, that are about the quality of the design, the quality of the materials, being compatible with surrounding character, integrating with established urban form. Historic preservation in particular gets very specific and very site by site detailed on what's historically appropriate for any given building, that it may be appropriate for this one property, but nowhere else in the city. So there's there's an array there in how the review happens. But obviously these are things that have to have some discretion to them, because if it was all just, you know, a checklist, there wouldn't really be much need for the design review commissions and committees. And I think that reflects the diverse character of all of these different design review areas. What's right in one location or on one block may not be the right thing on, you know, the next block over. So, and these are just some examples of the other guidelines and documents that are out there for the different design review commissions and committees to use. Historic preservation has a standalone document of standards and guidelines that is adopted within the ordinance, but then is a standalone document. We also have things like the downtown development framework that sets out additional criteria and requirements for downtown districts, and the building conservation and revitalization guidelines that has a lot of recommendations and encouraging language and guideline language for specifically existing and historic buildings in all of the design districts other than HP, since HP uses its own guidelines. So all of these may or may not be referenced as part of your project, but it's important to know that they're out there and they may be applicable to the type of work that you're doing.
Yes, I'm going to back up a couple of slides to talk about, there's a question about, which I think a lot of people have, is how much of design review is structurally based versus based on an artistic or visual preference. The regulations and guidelines are for everything but historic preservation. I'll have Katie talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but for all the other design review districts, the design regulations and guidelines are pretty basic and they're pretty big picture, and nothing in it suggests a specific style. Height and setback, those are black and white. You're this tall, you're this far off the street. The only reason that a kind of an individual preference would come into the interpretation of those is if you don't want to meet those or can't meet those. Then there will be a discussion on, well, should this project be required to meet these? If not, why not? If so, why? Materials, again, it's focused on the quality of the materials, not necessarily the pattern or the color, although obviously color, texture, and material are choices must be made in the context of where the project's going to be. Doors and windows, those are assessed on a percentage of open area of your facade. Parking lots, sidewalks, landscaping, those are all dimensions, points, approved species. Signs are calculated off of building frontage, and you're allowed a certain number and size of signs. So I think most people would be surprised that the cottage district, for example, there are no guidelines saying it must be a contemporary or modern style structure. There aren't. It's just that has been an artistic choice. And there have been some cases over the last several years of people who have proposed structures that aren't as modern or contemporary as some might think is preferred, but they are allowed if they meet all these regulations and guidelines. I hope that helps. Okay, but for historic preservation, stylistic choices are extremely critical because all the individual HP districts are defined by a specific visual character. Katie, do you have more to say about that part?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think that's accurate. That covers it.
Okay, so we talked about this and the guidelines. Okay, so keys to success. And now that you know exactly what to do and how to find your zoning, where to get the guidelines, you know, how can you make sure that you can get through the process as easily and with as much success as possible? One is a plan ahead. For a lot of our work, especially the committee meetings, a lot of our schedule is dictated by the public meeting dates. Those are published a year in advance. So we have limited ability to change those. There are legally required notice requirements of when notices have to go out and to whom. That's statute. We can't do anything about that. We staff have to follow that. We're empathetic. We want to help you get your project done, but if you get caught in the last minute bind, we just have limited ability to change certain aspects of the process. So plan ahead, like Katie said, that usually starts with a call to her or to one of her staff. Pre-application conference. As soon as you call Katie or one of her staff, they'll suggest that you come in and show us the basic site plan. If you have any information about your building massing, we'll want to see that. Most helpful is a site plan and a first floor plan. So the city offices are closed to the public right now because of the pandemic, but everybody is available by video conference, telephone, email. It is time well spent, a lot of on your part, and people think it's taking time out of our workday, but that's why current planning and urban design exists. I mean, it is their job to meet with you and walk you through the requirements. That's also a great opportunity for staff to look out for hot button issues with utilities, building code, traffic. Really strongly encourage the pre-application conference. A submittal checklist that's attached to the application forms, make sure that you follow it, and related to it, the submittal checklist that talks about what types of drawings and their scale and the information it needs to show. Complete application. A lot of what frustrates applicants is, and staff, to be honest, is people think they have submitted a complete application, but they haven't. Some common things that are missed are: one, the applications require the owner's signature, the owner, not the tenant. And some tenants are given the right to sign applications and to do work in the lease. In the tenant lease, it'll specify that they can make changes. And if that's the case, you can send us a copy of your lease proving that you are authorized to sign on behalf of the owner. This also comes up if you are buying a property, but you don't yet own it, but you need to go ahead and get your design approved. Sometimes the agreement allows you to file. Sometimes you have to go back and get the owner's signature. So this is a big deal. So just pay attention. We need the owner's signature. Complete application also means a valid address. So again, if you're not sure what your address is, don't guess. Talk to subdivision and zoning, and they can help you verify what your address is. Drawings that are legible, that are to scale. they have a north arrow, they have a property line. Back to, so when I showed you the zoning locator, I did not show you the county assessor's page, but who owns the property? People submit applications to us all the time that have addresses and signatures for property they don't own. And so that's, we can't do anything with that. So please pay attention to your application completeness. Are there any questions about this part?
Hey, Lisa.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe one question related to this. Can you clarify whether or not you need a CA for interior work inside of a building within a design district? And
Great question. You do not. If you're not, design review is only for things on the exterior. So, so if you're not doing, if nothing you're doing on the interior results in a change to the exterior, then you don't need a CA.
And then one kind of going back to the committee process, what percentage of applications do you think are approved at the first design review meeting and don't get continued?
90 to 90, well, not including HP, for everything but HP, 90 or 95% get approved the first time, and that is for several reasons. One, because the applicant has had a pre-application conference and staff has returned comments, and staff and the applicant have worked back and forth on what staff sees could be things that don't meet the guidelines. So all of those things have been worked out before it gets to committee. So by the time committee reviews it, they are reviewing drawings and an application that have been vetted to identify any issues. Katie's is, HP is a little different.
Yeah, I would say HP is probably more in the 60 to 70% range that get approved the first time. And I think there's just such a different dynamic with, can you hear me? Yeah, with a homeowner that's proposing something for their home versus, you know, a commercial project where the homeowner may want to go ahead and take something to the commission that they really, really want, even though staff has advised we don't think it's likely to get approved. Whereas on a commercial project, I think those applicants are often more willing to go ahead and make changes so they can just get the project going. Yeah. I was going to say something on the complete application that popped into my head that also really, really helps us. I don't think it's necessarily captured on the checklist, but anytime we get an application where someone's proposing something, you know, from the get-go that clearly doesn't meet the guidelines or the regulations, it's really helpful if you include an explanation of why. If there's some unique element of your site or your building that makes it very difficult for you to meet those requirements, spell out why those changes are proposed, and makes it easier for staff to write a staff report and to follow up with the applicant about why they might need something that's not recommended by the guidelines.
Yes, so just to finish up these keys to success, the application and the checklist, they ask for a scope of work. This is a brief written narrative. I prefer it in the form of bullet points. It's just as simple as replacing front doors, replacing roof, constructing new garage, constructing new addition, just in plain, simple bullet points, what are you doing? Because especially for renovation projects, it's not always crystal clear on a drawing. The more easily that's identified by staff, the better off everybody will be. And keep in mind that this scope of work that you write, it needs to match your drawings and vice versa, because staff will, and the committee will notice if your drawings show something that is not clear and that doesn't match the scope. And for the most part, I think staff doesn't care what the scope of work is. We just need to know, and it needs to be accurately captured, because nothing disrupts the review process more than inconsistent documents and questions about what people are doing. Mind deadlines, like I said, the committee meetings are scheduled a year in advance, and the filing deadlines are set around when we have to publicly notice, and they're set around, you know, holiday business schedules. So please be mindful. Rarely are we able to squeeze something in if we get it past the deadline. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say about that, but I'll come back to it. Mind the deadlines. Oh, so every year between urban design and historic preservation, we do around 700 applications a year. That's administrative approvals and committee reviews. So there's just always someone ahead of you in line. That's what I'm saying. So the deadlines are set up to help us get through those in a timely manner. So just be mindful of that. Building permit revisions, Katie mentioned that at the time we sign off on the building permit, it has to match your CA. So I know, you know, we talked earlier about you could submit your design review paperwork at the same time you submit your building permit, but then if the permit desk makes changes, then you have this complete building permit set, but you didn't pick up those changes in the CA, and we won't know it till we get it to review, where you could have saved time by remembering to update your CA at the same time you updated your building permit set. And finally, again, plan ahead. I like to think that I like to think that everything required by design review are really best design practices and best urban design practices. It's not just a stray design requirements. I mean, it's designed to make your project successful. So, and I know most designer types and developer types, I mean, everybody hates process. Everybody hates paperwork and all these things, but it's a necessary part of the process. And, you know, I believe the result is worth it. So, but plan ahead, because it's difficult to do last minute, especially if you haven't opened up the guidelines before you have submitted for a CA, which does happen. So we'll keep monitoring for questions from the audience, but really quick, some other things you need to know, and that's if you haven't submitted for a building permit in a while, you may be excited to see that they've moved to electronic submittals. So I don't know, as I'm talking to you, what they're requiring for, if they're still even requiring big rolls of drawings. I think it's all electronic. And when design review staff sees it, they see it electronically. There's a new internal plan review software that they stamp from. Everybody got new big monitors so they can see the drawings. So that's been something I think a lot of people have been looking forward to for a while. And as soon as that gets up and running, then design review will move to electronic submissions.
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah.
I'll just say the new building permit submittal online is awesome as someone who makes a living doing paperwork and applications. One quick helpful tip, you cannot submit zip files. They'll let you submit it, but then they'll reject it later. So if you are filing for permit, just make sure it's all individual PDFs.
Right. And that has to do with the way the system catalogs it and forwards it around, I believe. Zoning relief, if there are regulations in the zoning code that you cannot meet, there are times when people cannot meet the setback. There are times when people cannot meet the height requirements. That process goes, those decisions are made by the Board of Adjustment. If you want to build something but you don't have the proper zoning, those decisions are made by the Planning Commission. If you're in a design review district, the design review committees, your project will have to go to the design review committee first before it is heard at Board of Adjustment. If you're trying to rezone either into a design district or out of or modify the zoning, those also will be heard by the design review committee before they are heard at Planning Commission. So knowing that your type of use is allowed is one of the first things you should check when you check on that zoning locator, because if you don't have the proper zoning, your project is dead in the water until you take care of it at Planning Commission, which is can be a very lengthy process. Arts Commission, things like murals on private property and art in the public way require review by the Arts Commission. It's almost identical process to design review, and you can actually submit the exact same drawings to Arts Commission. They meet monthly, and design review staff coordinates with Arts Commission on that workflow, but be mindful of that. Then COVID process changes, like I said, city offices are closed to the public, but all staff and all departments are still available. If you've tuned into Planning Commission, Design Review, or City Council lately, you'll have seen that they're all operating by Zoom, and a new platform called PrimeGov is going to be rolled out, I think, at one of the September City Council meetings. How to get involved? People often ask, well, who's making these decisions? Well, I want to make these decisions. Well, that's awesome. That's great. There is all the design review committees are staffed by volunteer citizen members. Each of the design review districts, including HP, they do have some membership requirements, like either you have to live in the district, own property in the district. Several have requirements for licensed architects, licensed engineers, landscape architects. Some are specifically just resident slots. All the committee members are appointed by the mayor with the consent of the city council. And there is a link posted here where people can submit an application. It does take off.
Oh, I was just going to note that.
Go ahead.
The link is really hard to find just navigating through the city's website. I don't know why, but I had to search for it. So if you 2 weeks from now think, I really want to try and get on one of those commissions and you can't find it, feel free to drop us an email or call and we'll send you the link straight to the form. Yes,
and so there's a fillable PDF and that goes to the mayor's office. It is, there are lots of dynamics in the process, and it may be some time before you hear about the status of your application. But we encourage everyone to apply. It's before I came to work for the planning department, I was on the Urban Design Commission. It's time well spent, as another commission friend of mine said, it's not for everybody. It does take time, it does take commitment, but I think it's a great way to give back to the community. But also, so that's one way to get involved, but there are other ways. If you're at all interested in development, especially in your neighborhood or your business district, I highly recommend following the Planning Commission agendas. You can get to those on okc.gov, and the City Council agendas, because that's where a lot of major decisions are made, even before they get to design review. You can also follow all of the design review committee agendas. If you live very near a project, you'll get mailed a public notice. If you're just outside of that, it's still worth just flipping through the agendas once a month to see what kind of projects are coming up. The staff reports for those are available online. So if you are planning to do a similar project, you can read up on what kind of issues they face, and that could be a good resource. So that's how to get involved. Development codes update. For the last year and a half, little over a year, we've been knee-deep in phase 2 of development codes update project. We have a consultant. Since the beginning of this year, we've established a stakeholder advisory team. We've held several focus groups, and we are working on the first draft of the revised sign code. This code update will touch all aspects of the code, but we were asked by City Manager's office to accelerate the sign code portion. Anybody who's worked with our sign code can understand why that is. It's very complicated and doesn't necessarily get the results everybody wants. So that's another way to get involved. If you go to this link, you can sign up for updates. You can read the past, or view the past presentations from the SAT meetings. And this project will continue through 2023. So I think that is all of our formal presentation, and we're happy to hear questions or comments.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that was great. And I'll just say from personal experience working with you, Katie, Laura, you're all extremely helpful, even for someone like myself who is filing applications every month. So we very much appreciate you both taking the time today.
Thank you. And Mark, I'll piggyback on what you just said. I will. Yes. So, so how often do we see you, Mark, to talk about a project? Let's say every month.
Yeah. Virtually, it seems like more because it's easier to schedule a meeting.
That's true. But I just use that as example, as these pre-application meetings they're not just for people who are doing it the first time. I think firms like Mark's are smart to do it every time. I mean, there's no reason not to do it every time, even if you've done the exact same project in the exact same place every year for the last 10 years. I mean, just as a second set of eyes, there might be some guidelines that have changed recently that you're not aware of. There might be some adjacent development that staff is aware of that you're not aware of that might affect your project. So I think it's good practice for the experienced and the inexperienced.
Well, I had a few questions that were sent directly to me, Lisa. The first one, do you think in the code update that there will be a consolidation of the variance process to where an applicant doesn't have to do 2 different meetings, where the design review boards or the HP commission could hear and grant a variance to their own code?
I don't know. I do know that we are going to try to make the code more flexible so that people need fewer variants.
The next question has to do more with the street improvements of a project. Can you talk about your role and staff's role in street design, bike lane placement, and if the committees hear that, and who ultimately decides those types of improvements?
Sure. Now that's a great question. So we talked earlier that design review only is looking at the outside of a building and the building site. Design review looks from the facade of the building to the street curb. So design review does not look at the area between the curbs. The decisions for bike lanes, paving, and parking are all made, the approvals for that are formally made by Public Works and Traffic. Planning is at the table in terms of we have guidelines for bike lanes and Bike Walk OKC that designates where and what types of bike facilities should be provided. Also, various documents that suggest where on-street parking should be located. So planning has developed a lot of those guidelines, but Public Works and Traffic are who actually approve it. Design review does not approve what happens between the curbs. That said, we do advise on it often, at least staff does, because where street parking is and how it's laid out has a direct effect on on street furniture placement, street tree placement. So we'll often work back and forth on that. Sometimes those improvements require that the curb be moved either closer to the building or farther away. And when that happens, design review will see it.
So a follow-up to that, are you reviewing Bike Walk OKC when an applicant comes in and is showing different access points of how a vehicular entrance might be impacting either the streetcar route or a future bike lane?
Yeah, for the street, the Downtown Development Framework, which is a supplemental guideline to the downtown ordinance, it has guidelines about minimizing new curb cuts onto the streetcar route. So we do look at that for downtown. The bike lanes, we look at it. We don't always look at it unless something about the curb cut catches our attention.
And then there was a great comment in the chat box by Shane, which is, I sure wish the city had to go through public notice and design review for street projects. So I don't know if that could be captured in the code update, but I would second that comment.
Yes, thank you.
And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to jump in. I had one last question that was sent to me directly, Lisa, and it's a tough one. So I'll be interested to hear you and Katie's thoughts. It is, recently there has been a lot of conversations about how zoning codes are embedded with racist regulations that are designed to keep certain people out of their neighborhoods. How do you weigh the historic preservation neighborhoods with current best practices for increasing density in neighborhoods where others might want to live who can't afford a larger single family home? And a follow-up, will the city's code update allow for ADUs, lot splits, and mansion conversions into something like an 8-plex?
I'll answer first and then I'll pitch it to Katie. Yes, one thing we heard from everybody about the code update was that everybody wanted more variety, more choice in housing options, ADUs. We haven't gotten there yet in the development of the code, so I can't describe to you that we are proposing specific solutions. But yes, that's definitely on everybody's radar as something to accomplish. For historic preservation neighborhoods, I think people forget that there are historic multifamily structures in a lot of the neighborhoods that continue, to be utilized. And Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think many of our historic districts have the historic district itself, the way they were built. They have duplexes and fourplexes and small apartment buildings. Some even have quite large apartment buildings. They have, existing garage apartments. They have exactly what a lot of, more recent kind of planning efforts and land use efforts are looking for when we talk about a more mixed use, more integrated neighborhood with different property types. Our historic preservation zoning that was implemented in 1969 was introduced as a base zoning that only allowed basically single family. I can't tell you what the thought process was behind that, but obviously our zoning has grown much more sophisticated since 1969. We now also have a historic landmark overlay that doesn't regulate the base zoning, the use of the property. So, and I will say that the commission and staff pretty consistently have supported, applications for variances or special exceptions, that sort of thing, when a property owner was trying to revert to that historic use of a duplex or a fourplex, apartment buildings, that sort of thing. But I think it is something that right now is challenging, that historic use of those buildings is often not technically allowed under their current zoning. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to introduce those different property types and uses back into the historic districts that were there historically in a way that's still compatible with the character of the historic neighborhood.
It was a great answer to a tough question. And Lisa Sandino brought up that he had a similar question and wants to know how people on this call could make it easier for you as you move through this process to, I assume where he's going is to advocate for these types of things throughout the core in Oklahoma City.
Sure, we will. And we've had some I mentioned earlier that we had done several focus groups. Those were limited to signage, but as we move in to other aspects of the code, we'll be asking for volunteers for those. We'll be asking for people to review code drafts. So again, you can go, if you're on one of our design review committees, you will, you'll probably be notified pretty early, but you can sign up for updates and put your name on the, hey, I want to be involved list at this development codes update.
Great. Did anyone else have any other questions? Give it just a second. And while that's happening, Lisa and Katie, I'll just thank you again for taking time, especially on a day where there was a design review committee hearing, to do this for us. I thought it was great. And for me, it was a helpful reminder of a lot of things that, sometimes just forget as you're working through the process.
Thank you.
So
Lisa, I just had a quick question. Anthony had a really good comment in the chat about that development liaison position. Can you speak just really quickly to what that position is used for?
Yeah. Anthony mentioned her name is Donna McMurtry, and she is her title is Development Center Liaison, and she's there to help people interface specifically kind of between departments. Like if you're having trouble getting answers and information from traffic, utilities, code enforcement, things like that, definitely bring her in. She's also if you realize your project needs to be rezoned and needs to go to traffic commission and it needs to be coordinated with a street enhancement project, then you definitely want to contact her for a review meeting, because she can help bring all those different parties together just to get everybody on the same page. She works in both kind of at the building permit stage when you're trying to get something developed, as well as if you have extended like code enforcement, abandoned buildings issues, she can help connect you to information. And yeah, Anthony posted her phone number again. That is her job, is to help you navigate these things. Katie and I, we work in planning, and part of our job is to connect you to other departments for information. But we can't get very, knee deep in that effort, because we're taking care of kind of planning's approvals. But Donna can help on broader development issues.
And Anthony followed up with, she's also helpful on inspections when you do get through your permitting and.
If you're waiting for inspectors, you keep failing inspection. Yeah, all those aspects. And some of you may know Donna. She was a plans examiner for a long time, so she knows how it all works and what everyone's dealing with.
And Shane put in the link for the development code update in the chat too, so you can grab it there. Lisa, Katie, any last remark before we
No, we'll look forward to hearing it from everybody and from a meeting with you to discuss your project.